This is The Cluttered Path, where we pursue entertainment, humor, self-improvement, and meaning in life. My name is Todd, and I'm here with James.
Good day.
Today's episode is part 2 in our series on the life of Genghis Khan. We're going to focus on his childhood from birth to around age 16. The question we're going to answer today is this: what was the path that took Temujin from a timid, scared child to the warrior named Genghis Khan, who created the largest empire in human history? Ready to do this, James?
After the last episode, I have prepared myself for feelings of inadequacy. So let's go.
So as I read this book that we started in the last episode, I immersed myself in the stories, imagining life in Mongolia in the 12th century, an alien universe compared to our modern way of thinking today. So I recommend you pick up the book and immerse yourself in it because it's a good read. We'll start with a reading from chapter 2 of the book entitled Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World by Jack Weatherford. The chapter opens with a story about the Battle of Bukhara in the year 1220 AD. So let's begin. From the time of his Central Asian conquests, we have one of the few written descriptions of Genghis Khan, who was about 60 years old. A Persian chronicler described him as, quote, a man of tall stature, of vigorous build, robust in body, the hair on his face scanty and turned white, with cat's eyes, possessed of dedicated energy, discernment, genius, and understanding, awe-striking, a butcher, just, resolute, an overthrower of enemies, intrepid, sanguinary, and cruel, unquote. Genghis Khan's targeted city of Bukhara was in the newly created empire of Khwarezm, one of the many transitory empires of the era. The Sultan of Khwarezm had, in a grievously fatal mistake, provoked the enmity of Genghis Khan by looting a Mongol trade caravan and disfiguring the faces of Mongol ambassadors sent to negotiate peaceful commerce. Although nearly 60 years old, when Genghis Khan heard of the attack on his men, he did not hesitate to summon his disciplined and experienced army once again to their mounts and to charge down the road of war. The civilian population of Bukhara surrendered and opened the city gates, but the small contingent of defiant soldiers remained in their citadel, where they hoped that the massive walls would allow them to hold out indefinitely against any siege. Having begun the systematic plundering of the city, Genghis Khan turned his attention to attacking the Turkic warriors still defiantly sealed inside the citadel of Bukhara. The attack was designed as a show of overwhelming strength for which the audience was not the already conquered people of Bukhara, but the still distant and army people of Samarkand, the next city on his march. Genghis Khan's army combined the traditional fierceness and speed of the steppe warrior with the highest technological sophistication of Chinese civilization. Genghis Khan used his fast-moving and well-trained cavalry against the enemy's infantry on the ground, while negating the protective power of the fortress walls with the new technology of bombardment, using firepower and unprecedented machines of destruction to penetrate the fortress and terrorize its defenders. With fire and death raining down on the men in the citadel, the warriors of the Sultan, in Giovanni's words, quickly, quote, drowned in the sea of annihilation, unquote. Genghis Khan recognized that warfare was not a sporting contest or a mere match between rivals. It was a total commitment of one people against another. Victory did not come to the one who played by the rules. It came to the one who made the rules and imposed them on his enemy. His attack on Bukhara ranked as a success not merely because the people of that city surrendered, but because when word of the Mongol campaign reached the capital of Samarkand, that army surrendered as well. The Sultan fled his kingdom, and the Mongol juggernaut pushed onward. For precisely 700 years, from that day in 1220 until 1920, when the Soviets moved in, Genghis Khan's descendants ruled as Khans and Emirs over the city of Bukhara in one of the longest family dynasties in history. Genghis Khan's ability to manipulate people and technology represented the experienced knowledge of more than 4 decades of nearly constant warfare. At no single crucial moment in his life did he suddenly acquire his genius at warfare. His ability to inspire the loyalty of his followers or his unprecedented skill for organizing on a global scale. So these derived not from epiphanic enlightenment or formal schooling, but from a persistent cycle of pragmatic learning, experimental adaptation, and constant revision driven by his uniquely disciplined mind and focused will. His fighting career began long before most of his warriors at Bukhara had been born. And in every battle, he learned something new. In every skirmish, he acquired more followers and additional fighting techniques. In each struggle, he combined the new ideas into a constantly changing set of military tactics, strategies, and weapons. He never fought the same war twice. So that's the end of the reading. And much of that sounded very academic, far above my brain capacity. But my takeaway here is that Jack Weatherford is telling us that Genghis Khan's abilities didn't mysteriously come about instantaneously. He was disciplined, he was adaptive, and just constantly learning. And I also found the description of Genghis Khan interesting. I mean, he was almost 60 years old, very strong with a sharp mind.
While a warrior, also a benevolent dictator, disciplined mind and focused will, those are words folks would use to describe folks like Steve Jobs, a driven, highly intelligent man.
I agree. I mean, this just the background information we're getting from this book is, it's eye-opening for me personally, because history just records what I learned in history was that, Genghis Khan was just a butcher. We weren't treated to all the other aspects of his intellect and whatnot. But yeah, he was very adaptive. So as a quick overview for today's episode, our path today is going to cover, first off, Temujin's childhood. Oh, that's his childhood name, by the way. Temujin is Genghis Khan's birth name. And we're going to start by talking about his family and friends. And then we're going to be treated to tales of death and murder from the book. And then we're going to finish up with a love story.
Yeah, and a reminder that all this occurs before age 17.
Before age 17. Very young people here. So let's start with Temujin's childhood. First off, he was born in the year 1162 AD. And in our last episode, we covered their nomadic and tribal culture. So let's start now and dig in deeper with a look at his parents. Let's start with his family. First off, his mother, her name was Hoelun, Hoelun. And the first description we get of Hoelun is when she was married to her first husband. So around age 16, she was married to a man named Chalidu from the Merkid tribe. There is no test on this, so you don't have to track this information. But she was married at age 16 to Chalidu from the Merkid tribe. And right after the wedding, she was kidnapped while traveling back to the husband's tribe. So she's riding in a wagon accompanied by her husband on horseback, 16 years old. And I'm going to read a quick excerpt from the kidnapping. Quote, "Too poor to afford the presents necessary to make a marriage with a wife such as Hoelun, and perhaps unwilling to perform the traditional bride service for her parents, the hunter chose the second most common way of obtaining a wife on the steppes." Now, just pausing here for a second. The book is describing the person that is actually performing the kidnapping. So this is the hunter unable to perform the bride service and pay for a bride. He's resorting to kidnapping a wife. Here's the hunter and his two brothers. So the 3 brothers set out in pursuit of their unsuspecting prey. As they swooped down toward the couple, Chalidu, that's the new husband, Chalidu immediately galloped off to draw the attackers away from the cart, and as expected, they chased after him. He tried in vain to lose them by circling around the base of the mountain to return to his bride. Although only a teenage girl, she decided that in order to give her husband a chance to live, she must stay and surrender to her kidnappers. If she fled with Chalidu on one horse, they would be captured and he would be killed. But if he fled alone, only she would be captured. To convince her husband to cooperate with her plan, she told him, quote, "If you but live, There will be maidens for you on every front and in every cart. You can find another woman to be your bride, and you can call her Holun in place of me," unquote. Holun then quickly slipped out of her blouse and commanded her new husband to flee quickly. She thrust her blouse into his face as a parting gesture and said, "Take this with you so that you may have the smell of me with you as you go." Her captor and the man destined to be her new husband was Yasuge, of the small and insignificant band that would one day be known as the Mongols. But at this time, he was simply a member of the Borigin clan. So here we have Holun captured, and the book goes on to describe her life as a captive of Yasuge. I mean, it just heartbreak, because she never saw her first husband, Chalidu, again. And she became the second wife of Yasuge, her captor. The first wife was a lady named Sochigel, and there was just lots of strife there between Sochigel, her children, and Holun and her future kids. So Holun was just regarded as property. The book calls her a, quote, captured chattel slave, and chattel slave means just property. And that's just a sad state of affairs. And that was her life as a captive of Yasuge. So we're talking here about a 16-year-old teenage girl who was selfless. And she was more concerned with the life of her husband than her own, and sacrificed herself to save the new husband from raiders. Genghis Khan's mother was a tough lady, James.
Indeed. It's easy to see where Genghis Khan got his inspiration and intelligence from. His mother was caring, fearless, and quick thinking.
So that's Holun, the mother. Now we're going to get into Yasuge, the father. This was the man who captured Holun. He was a member of this small clan called the Borigin. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. But this small clan would eventually become the Mongols. And there's a section of the book here where the author goes into how Temujin got his name. And here's another excerpt from the book. Shortly after he had kidnapped Holun, Yasuge had gone on a campaign against the Tatars and killed a warrior called Temujin Uge. Temujin Uge was his name. Returning just after the birth of his son, he named the boy Temujin. Since people of the steppe received only one name in life, its selection carried much symbolism, often on several levels. The name imparted to the child its character, fate, and destiny. The name seems to have the common root of the verb temul, which occurred in several Mongol words, meaning to rush headlong, to be inspired, to have a creative thought, and even to take a flight of fancy. As one Mongolian student explained it, the word was best exemplified by, quote, the look in the eye of a horse that is racing where it wants to go, no matter what the rider wants, unquote. So here we have what I think is a fitting name for Genghis Khan, because as a warrior, he established the rules of the game and imposed them on his enemies. But we're also seeing here in the book, we get insight into this father-son relationship, because the author tells us that Yasuge saw little value in Temujin. He did not actually want his son. I mean, and then the examples that he gives are, first off, he accidentally left him behind once. He forgot his son, left him behind, and another tribe actually found him and kept him for a while. And Temujin eventually wound up being returned to his parents, but there's just that fundamental lack of concern and care by the father. And what I'm getting from that is that Temujin was basically an unwelcome, unwanted, and unloved by his own father. So he experienced emotional deprivation as a child, just lacking basic connection. I've read somewhere that, lacking basic connection with your dad has damaging psychological effects that last into adulthood.
Indeed. Life during this time was hard. The last episode we talked about the climate, the tribal raids, etc. And we also see Genghis Khan, nay Temujin, as a child rejected by his own father. We can see all these influences shaping this young boy.
Agreed. So now we're treated to a love story, bit of tragedy, and the author takes us now to Temujin's betrothal to his future wife. And here the author goes into depths of explaining how Yasuge actually wanted to rid himself of Temujin, possibly due to strife between the children of his two wives.
How old was he now?
He was age 9. Yeah, good call out. But around age 9, Holun, they started thinking about marriage and betrothal at this stage in life. And Holun wanted Temujin to marry someone from her people. And so Yasuge took Temujin, and they traveled. And on their way, they stayed with a family. And Temujin actually was introduced to the daughter of that family, and her name is Borte. So they meet for the first time when Temujin was age 9. And I learned in the book that it was common for the potential wife to be a little bit older than the boy. But Temujin was 9, so we're guessing that she was just a little bit older than that. But the girl's name was Borte, Borte. But they met one another. They liked each other. And Yasuge arranged this marriage with Borte's father. So Yasuge arranges this marriage. Temujin and Borte become betrothed to one another. And later on in the book, they would eventually marry and grow to love one another. So I'm just thinking of this story, and, Temujin his dad is trying to just get rid of him, just wants to be rid of this kid. But we have a sad situation here, and a love story begins.
Yeah, and that's kind of sort of my takeaway too, that it kind of seemed to make sense that he's coming away from, a dad that doesn't want him around, and he meets this young lady. My sense is he wants it to be different. Let's go into this new relationship and let's try to make something work.
Yeah, our goal today, we're talking about shaping influences. What was it about his childhood that shaped who he was as an adult? But that sets the stage for Temujin's family situation after his birth. A not so happy situation. It ends up getting even worse with the next major life event. So the next part of the book goes into the death of Yasuge, Temujin's father. So here are the circumstances of his death. After leaving Temujin with Borte's family, and by the way, let me back up just a bit. That was the next step. Yasuge left Temujin with Borte's family because they would eventually be married. But after he left Temujin with the family, he traveled back to his clan. And then en route, he came upon a camp of Tatars. It's Tatars. So if someone out there knows how to properly pronounce that, would be glad to take that input. But anyways, he came upon a camp of Tatars, and he joined there. They had some feast going on, and he joined them, and he tried to conceal his identity because Yasuge had actually killed one of their kinsmen. And that was the guy Temujin that he killed originally, that he named his son after. But he had killed their kinsman, and someone in their camp eventually recognized him. And so what they did was they slipped poison into his food and made him really sick. So he didn't die immediately. He made his way back to the clan, but he would eventually die. And after the poisoning, word got back to Borte's family, and Temujin was told about his father's illness. So Temujin traveled back to his family, but it was too late. He died. And then we get into, that's tragic enough, but it gets even worse. Because tradition, when a husband died, tradition called for a brother of the husband or the son of one of his other wives to marry the widow. So yes, a brother of Yasuge or one of his sons from a different wife could marry the widow. That was tradition. And so we run into now the problem. So Holun, she actually had too many kids for one man to support, along with the other wife. And she was still regarded as, quote, a captive, property. So there was actually no money or beneficial family connections here. So what happened is the family abandoned her. So the whole clan just said, okay, we're done. And I want to read an excerpt here that goes into those details. With her husband dead and no other man willing to take her, Holun was now outside the family, and as such, no one had any obligation to help her. The message that she was no longer a part of the band came to her the way Mongols always symbolize relationships, through food. In the spring, when two old crones, the widows of a previous Khan, organized the annual ceremonial meal to honor the family's ancestors, they did not inform Holun, thereby cutting her off not only from the food itself, but from membership in the family. She and her family were therefore left to feed and protect themselves. As the clan prepared to move down the Onon River toward summer grounds, they planned to leave Holun and her children behind. As the band moved out, deserting the 2 women and 7 children, only a single old man from a low-ranking family in the band objected loudly to what they were doing. In an incident that apparently made a deep impression on Temujin, one of the deserting Taichiud bellowed back to the old man that he had no right to criticize them, turned back and speared the old man to death. Upon seeing this, Temujin, at this point a boy of no more than 10 years, is said to have dashed up to try to help the dying man. Unable to do anything, he just sobbed in hurt and anger. And then we go into Holun's response to being abandoned. And back to the book here, another excerpt. Holun, who had shown such clear-headedness during her kidnapping a decade earlier, showed the same determination and strength during this new crisis. She made a violent and defiant last effort to shame the Taichiud into keeping her family. As the clan deserted their encampment, she grabbed up the horsehair spirit banner of her dead husband, mounted her horse, and chased after them. Raising the spirit banner over her head and waving it furiously in the air, she circled the fleeing people. For Holun, to wave the banner of her dead husband was not merely to wave his emblem, but to parade his very soul in front of the deserting tribesmen. They indeed felt such shame in the presence of his soul and fear of possible supernatural retribution from it that they temporarily returned to the camp. They then awaited nightfall and, one by one, sneaked away, taking with them the family's animals, thereby condemning to a nearly certain winter death both widows and their 7 children. But the family did not die. In a monumental effort, Holun saved them, all of them. She covered her head, tucked up her skirt, and ran up and down the river searching for food day and night in order to feed her 5 hungry children. She found small fruits and used a juniper stick to dig up the roots of the plants growing along the river. To help feed the family, Temujin made wooden arrows tipped with sharpened bones to hunt rats on the steppe, and he bent his mother's sewing needles into fish hooks. As the boys grew older, they hunted larger game. In the words of the Persian chronicler Juvaini, who visited the Mongols 50 years later and wrote one of the first foreign accounts of the life of Temujin, the family wore clothing, quote, of the skin of dogs and mice, and their food was the flesh of those animals and other dead things, unquote. Wow, so family traditions are completely out the window. Yeah. Nobody wants to take responsibility for Yasuge's family after his death. And the lesson here I'm taking away is that sometimes cultural norms are sometimes broken when tough situations arise. And here we see loyalty and support from your own clan was not a given.
Yeah. More shaping of the clay, instability and uncertainty. You know, what else can we add today?
Yeah. Tragedy on top of tragedy. So we'll now dig into another important person in the life of Temujin. And this is where the book goes into a boy named Jamuka, who was friends with Temujin, and he would be a shaping influence on Genghis Khan into adulthood. So Jamuka, he was a slightly older boy from a totally different clan, and they camped near Temujin's clan on the banks of the Onon River. Their friendship formed while hunting, fishing, riding horses, and just playing in general as kids. But they ended up, along the way, they became such great friends that 2 times in their young years, they swore an oath of brotherhood. The first oath was an exchange of toys around age 11, and they declared their friendship with one another. But the second time, a certain time later, there was a second oath that took place where the two boys made declarations of brotherhood, and they performed a ceremonial swallowing of each other's blood. And so the book introduces this concept called the anda. So the boys became andas of one another. So an anda in Mongolian culture is a ceremonial brother. And this is a bond this brotherhood bond is stronger than biological brothers because you freely chose that tie. You can't choose who you're born into, the family, but you can choose an anda. And so this is a pretty interesting concept. And Jamuka would be the only anda that Temujin ever had. And later in life, sadly, there would be strife with Jamuka, despite the bond of brotherhood. But we're going to look into that as we go. But this close friendship with Jamuka completely formed outside of the clan and the family. And another thing that struck me was this dichotomy. Mongols were scavengers, struggling to eke out an existence, yet they developed these ceremonial practices around relationships. And as humans, just applying that to my own mind here, as humans, we attach meaning to things. We attach meaning to things, people, and groups. And then we develop rituals as a sort of worship of the meaningful things in our lives.
Indeed. We have a strong desire for connection. And it was interesting in a culture where everyone could be seen as a competitor, there was still that desire for companionship, friendship.
Yes. No matter how debased and violent and hard things are, we still desire connection. I agree, James. So the next character we're introduced in the book is a fellow named Begter, Begter. He is the bullying stepbrother. So this is the nature of their relationship. He was the son of Yasuge's first wife, and there was intense sibling rivalry there. And Begter was a bully. He bullied Temujin. And we learn here at this point that there was this strict hierarchy that ruled the clans in Mongolia. And with the father dead, with Yasuge dead, Begter was the eldest son, and he was granted authority as the firstborn. And so he began exercising his authority over the clan, and he began staking his claim. And when he bullied Temujin, one of the things that he did was, Temujin had seized, he'd seized a lark, a bird, and he took that from Temujin. So Temujin had shot this lark, and Begter just swoops in and takes it from him. And in another instance, Begter and another of their brothers took a fish that Temujin had caught. And at that point, Temujin ran to his mother to tattle, but funny thing is, Holon sided with Begter because he had rights of the eldest son. So the mom was sitting here going, sure. He's the oldest brother. He's got authority. So he took your fish. Oh, well, give it up. So these rights of the eldest son, it gave him command authority over the younger siblings. And then we're introduced to this concept of that eldest son also having rights of sexual access to the father's wives, except for his own mother, of course. And then we learn that Holon, Temujin's mom, was actually agreeable to this arrangement. She was open to marrying Begter. And that was an offense to Temujin. So we have another excerpt here where we're going to learn that Temujin actually murders Begter, his bully. So let's go back to the book. Holon would accept Begter as her husband when he became old enough, thereby making him the head of the family in every sense. Temujin, however, decided not to tolerate such a situation with Begter. After the emotional confrontation with his mother over Begter, Temujin threw aside the felt covering over the doorway, a highly offensive gesture in Mongol culture, and angrily rushed off, followed by his younger brother Kasar. The two brothers found Begter sitting silently on a small knoll overlooking the steppe, and approached him cautiously through the grass. Temujin instructed Kassar, who was the best shot in the family, to circle toward the front of the knoll while he himself climbed up the backside. They crept up on Begtur quietly, as if stalking a resisting or arresting deer or grazing gazelle. When they came within easy striking distance, each silently placed an arrow in his bow, and then suddenly rose out of the grass with bows drawn. Begtur did not run, or even attempt to defend himself. He would not deign to show fear in front of his younger brothers, admonishing them, in the same words as their mother had, that their real enemy was the Taichiud clan. He is reported to have said, quote, "I am not the lash in your eye, the impediment in your mouth. Without me, you have no companion but your own shadow," unquote. He sat cross-legged and still as his two younger brothers continued to approach him. Knowing clearly what fate lay ahead, Begtur still refused to fight. Instead, he made one final request of them, that they spare the life of his younger, full brother, Belgute. Maintaining their distance from him, Temujin and Kassar shot their arrows straight into Begtur, Temujin striking him in the back while Kassar hit him from the front. Rather than approach him and risk contamination from his blood, which was flowing onto the earth, they turned and abandoned him to die alone. High drama. So here, family tradition classes with Temujin's sense of justice. I mean, there was no way Temujin was going to submit to the authority of a vengeful, spiteful bully. So, I mean, he resorted to violence and murder as an escape.
Yeah, we definitely see Temujin's choice here, justice. And to me, this is one of the seminal moments in the choices and direction as we see him heading towards becoming Khan.
And the next step, Temujin will face retribution. So Holon, when she heard about the murder, she was enraged. So she finds out about Begtur, Temujin, and his brother Kassar killing them, and she just went into a rage. Because killing Begtur was actually a taboo act, putting their family in jeopardy. And so they had no protector or ally. This became open season on Temujin. So the Taichiud clan, they sent a party of warriors to capture and punish Temujin. So he's taken into captivity, and in captivity, they strap him into this device. It's like an ox yoke. So he could walk, but his hands were tied. He couldn't feed himself, couldn't drink water. A different family within the Taichiud clan had to care for him every day. So one family of war captives, I mean, this was another family of war captives taking care of, they were given the duty of taking care of Temujin, another captive. So this family took him into their tents and tended his wounds, and they shared their food with him. And eventually, they helped him escape. Here's another excerpt from the book. That the Taichiud with whom he shared a close kinship tie had once put his family out to die, and now appeared eager to kill him. This other family, which had no kinship tie to him, proved willing to risk their lives to help him. This episode seems to have instilled in him not only a distrust of higher-ranking people, but also the conviction that some people, even those outside his clan, could indeed be trusted as if they were family. In later life, he would judge others primarily by their interactions toward him, and not according to their kinship bonds. A revolutionary concept in steppe society. So here we have the clan who left Temujin's family to die, the Taichiud. They're coming in to exact revenge on Temujin for murdering Begtur. So I can understand how Temujin's mental state would be rebellious against this culture. I mean, they selectively enforced tribal law. His enemies were his own kinsmen.
Right, and contrast that with the kindness of the strangers who took care of him in captivity. Temujin had both examples in his life, which would prove to provide balance and further shape his character.
Again, we're on this path. What led him to become the person he was? And these are just interesting stories. Tragedy, but I can see how his sense of justice was just violated. And he's just looking at his society and thinking, this isn't right.
Yeah.
So not a good situation. But now in the next step of the book, we're treated to a love story. So at this point, the year is 1178 AD, and Temujin has turned 16. He had not seen Borte, his betrothed spouse, since the father's death about 7 years earlier. So accompanied by his half-brother Belgute, Temujin goes in search of Borte's family. So Borte's father actually, when they found him, when they met up, Borte's father actually allowed the marriage, despite Temujin's trouble with the Taichiud. So he was aware that the Taichiud were after him and wanted to punish him and get retribution for the death of Begtur, but he still allowed the marriage. So Temujin, after the marriage takes place, he makes provision for his own new clan's protection. So the book again brings up this term Anda, A-N-D-A. That's that ceremonial brother type of arrangement. And Yasuge, who is Temujin's father, who is now dead, Yasuge had a ceremonial brother, or Anda, whose name was Torgil. And after the marriage, it's customary for the bride, so it was expected of Borte, Temujin's wife, to bring a gift of clothing to the husband's parents. So Yasuge's dead. Temujin has no living biological father. So Temujin actually brought that gift to Torgil, his father's ceremonial brother. And so acceptance of this gift, what it represented was Torgil would be accepting Temujin as his son. And he did accept this. So through acceptance of this gift, an alliance was formed with Yasuge's Anda. So Temujin's small clan, this budding clan that was formed by the marriage, is now under the protection of Torgil. So what is the small clan? So at this point, you've got 7 teenage boys who are there to hunt and protect the group. And the ladies in the camp included Holun, his mother, Xochitl, this was the stepmom, Begter's mom, Borte, the wife, Temujin's sister, and 4 older women. So it's a relatively small clan here who needed protection. And so that's the importance of this alliance with Torgil. So here we have more insight into the practices of the Mongols. They developed, I find it very interesting that they developed rituals that ascribed meaning to relationships. And these created kinship ties outside of the family bloodlines. Temujin, he made this bid to Torgil wanting to be accepted as a son. It was accepted, and Torgil became the protector of Temujin's clan.
Yeah, these rituals had great significance to the Mongol people. You know, the blood brother ritual discussed earlier, and now we see what is essential a ritual of adoption, or more accurately, a petition for adoption and acceptance. Again, we see the value being put on relationships and not just family.
So the marriage starts out well. They had a really good start. But those happy days were short-lived. So here, let's just dive right back into another excerpt. According to the account of the secret history, and by the way, when just stopping the reading there, when we reference the secret history, that is a book that the Mongols, it's a book of history written by the Mongols about themselves. So that's the secret history. Back to the book. According to the account of the secret history, Temujin would have preferred to remain simply the ruler of his intimate clan. But the roiling world of tribal attack and counterattack all around them would not allow so idyllic a life. For generations stretching back through hundreds of years, the tribes of the steppes had been preying on one another mercilessly. The memory of past transgressions lingered. An injury inflicted on any family within a tribe served as a license for retribution, and it could serve as a pretext for a raid even after many years. No matter how isolated they might attempt to be, no group such as Temujin's could go unaccounted for or untouched in this world of continual turmoil. And this is I'm just pausing the reading here, but this is where it gets really interesting. Back to the book. After all his family had already suffered, now, After 18 years, the tribe from which Temujin's mother had been abducted, the Merkid, decided to seek their vengeance for that slight. The Merkid came not to reclaim Holun, the widow who had grown old struggling to raise her 5 children, but after Borte, Temujin's young bride, who would serve to repay the kidnapping of Holun from them. The alliance he had so shrewdly made with Ong Khan, that was Torgil would become Ong Khan, by the way. So the alliance he so shrewdly made with Ong Khan / Torgil was to prove decisive in Temujin's response to this crisis. And the challenges of the Merkid would prove the decisive contest that would set him on his path to greatness. So we've got here now a very dramatic twist to this love story. The tribe who had abducted Holun's mother at age 16, or Temujin's mother, Holun, at age 16, that tribe who had abducted her had finally come around to seek retribution. And their act of revenge actually harms Holun because they're destroying her family. And so the takeaway I have here is that, we make our plans, but life often plays out much differently.
Yeah, the seeking retribution after 18 years, that was indeed a surprise. On one hand, you see people struggling to survive, the harsh climate, hunting, raiding other tribes, camps for food. And then on the other hand, you have a culturally rich society with deep traditions and family bonds, enough so to drive a people to seek revenge after so many years.
They held on to that grudge.
Yeah, that was a deep grudge.
Come hell or high water, they were going to get that retribution. And there's no thought as to who it might actually be hurting. So that struck me. Just more tragedy compounded on the abduction of Holun 18 years later. They're going to come hurt Holun with their retribution.
Yeah.
Just a sad state of affairs. So that's the end of chapter 2 in our book. And so let's just go through a quick recap of Temujin's childhood. Again, he had a cruel existence, fighting to survive, facing abandonment, death of his own father, the injustice of living under the authority of a little bully tyrant, and then the murder of that tyrant, Begter. And then he gets the unexpected support from a family and a rival clan. And then we see a love story running into tragedy. I've taken some lessons learned away from this. Genghis Khan, Temujin, encountered loyalty independent of family or clan ties. His own clan abandoned him and his whole family, left him to starve to death. Just a very cruel act. And then we see this strong bond that forms between Temujin and a kid named Jamuka from another tribe. And we're introduced to that concept of the Anda, the ceremonial brother, the brother that you choose. And it's even a stronger bond than your biological brother. And then we have that family in the clan that captured Temujin, who helped him escape. And through this, these shaping influences is where we see Temujin developing this idea of a meritocracy. So in adulthood, he developed this system based on individual merit, loyalty, and achievement. And he got rid of that aristocracy. So there was in Genghis Khan's mind, there was no advantage from clan affiliation or family name. And not only was that in his mind, that is what he implemented in his kingdom when he ruled. So back to the book, I'll read another excerpt here. How could an outcast child rise from such a lowly station to become the Mongols' great Khan? Searching through the account of Temujin's coming of age in The Secret History, we find crucial clues about the powerful role these early traumatic events must have played in the shaping of his character and, in turn, his rise to power. The tragedies his family endured seem to have instilled in him a profound determination to defy the strict caste structure of the steppes, to take charge of his fate, and to rely on alliances with trusted associates rather than his family or tribe as his primary base of support. So that's our last excerpt, and that's the end of our episode here. And in the next episode, we're going to look at this big decision point Temujin is faced with after Borte was captured. And it leads to some very dramatic events that started him on the path to becoming Genghis Khan. So thank you for joining us on The Cluttered Path.
We appreciate you coming along with us. Please take a moment to subscribe if you have not already.
Thank you for listening to The Cluttered Path. Today's episode was made possible by the writings of Jack Weatherford from his book, Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World. Copyright 2004 by Broadway Books, division of Penguin Random House. Music for today's episode is used with permission of the Lack family.